If you are hearing these words, then you are standing before one of the oldest mysteries of mankind. A mystery that is not only written in stone, in the ashes of ancient caves, but also engraved deep in every cell, every vein that flows in your own body. For more than a century, strange skeletons found throughout Europe and Western Asia have caused controversy among mankind. Some call them monsters. Some believe that they are just deformed primitives, lacking intelligence. And some believe that this is another branch of the human species that existed alongside us. Their name is Neanderthal. Imagine you are standing in a cold cave, the flickering light of a torch casting shadows on the cliffs. All around are fragments of broken bones. There is a skull, large, with protruding eyebrows, strong teeth. It is not exactly like us, but not strange either. A shiver ran down our spine. This was a human, but not us. For decades, Neanderthals were associated with a crude image, hunchbacked, slow, brutal. But archaeological evidence has shattered that stereotype. Neanderthals knew how to make sophisticated tools. They used fire. They buried their dead with rituals. They even knew how to make musical instruments from bones. In other words, they were human in every sense. Yet the biggest question that has never ceased to haunt scientists is, where did they come from? Were they a completely different branch of humanity, appearing and disappearing? Or were they our close brothers, just a few steps ahead in evolution? The answer, for tens of thousands of years, remained buried under layers of rock, ice, and even the dust of time, until science found a way to make bones speak. For most of the history of science, fossil bones have been treated as mute evidence. They can tell us how big a head was, how long an arm was, how strong a tooth was. But beyond those hard numbers, they can't tell a complete story. Everything changes when humanity learns to decode ancient DNA. Imagine a laboratory scene. Cold white light, glass tables covered with gloves and masks, centrifuges, test tubes so small that even the slightest tremor could ruin the experiment. On the table, a fragment of bone, no bigger than a piece of chalk. To the naked eye, it is just stone, brittle, porous, lifeless. But inside, in the tiny cavities, are still strands of DNA, buried, eroded, but not completely gone. At first, scientists thought it was impossible. DNA is fragile, easily degraded by light, moisture, and bacteria. How could it survive tens of thousands of years? But then, a turning point came at the end of the High century. New techniques, from PCR, DNA amplification, to next-generation sequencing, opened doors never before seen. And for the first time, bones could talk. Voices from the past, not in sound, but in genetic code. They tell us Neanderthals were not just a different species, but our closest relatives. About 1% of the DNA in modern humans, especially those of Asian and European descent, is Neanderthal. In other words, they never completely disappeared. A part of them lives on in us. This changes everything. If before, we only saw Neanderthals as a sad story of failed humans, now the picture is completely different. They were not completely replaced. They did not simply disappear. They have become part of us, leaving their mark on our genes, on our bodies, even on the way we fight disease and adapt to the environment. But the path to finding this truth is not easy. Remember, if just one speck of dust, one piece of skin from a scientist's hand, falls on a bone sample, all the ancient DNA will be overwhelmed. Dozens, hundreds of experiments have failed because of such a small amount of contamination. Labs that study ancient DNA are often located in sealed vaults with higher air pressure than the outside, so dust cannot get in. Researchers wear full-body protective suits, almost like astronauts, to ensure that no modern cells interfere with the voices of the past. And then, in Neanderthal, an international team of scientists announced they had reconstructed the Neanderthal genome, a milestone not only for archaeology, but also for humanity. Because from that moment, we could not only see the past through bones, but also read its bloodline. The results forever changed the way we think about our ancestors, and more importantly, it opened up the most haunting question of all. If we have Neanderthal genes, then does the boundary between us and them really exist? Imagine, 50,000 years ago, the Earth was much colder than it is today. Huge glaciers swept down from the north, swallowing up valleys and grasslands. The forests were sparse. The snow was deep. The sky was leaden. The world was a frozen kingdom. There, two human species coexisted. On one side, the Neanderthals, the ones who ruled this land for hundreds of thousands of years. They were slightly shorter than us, with broad shoulders, well-muscled, thick bones. Their bodies were built for harsh winters, for hunting giants, woolly rhinos, mammoths, bison as big as trucks. They lived in small groups, sheltering in caves, using fire to keep the darkness at bay. On the other side, Homo sapiens, the new arrivals from Africa, with a rich imagination, complex language, and an invisible but terrifying weapon, the ability to cooperate on a large scale. We were more fragile, physically weaker, but we could make cave paintings, create musical instruments, and perform rituals. And above all, we could imagine and then make our imaginations come true. When two species meet, it is more than just an encounter. It is a moment that shapes the destiny of all humanity. You might imagine it as a tragic scene, a primitive war where Homo sapiens swooped in and wiped out Neanderthals. But ancient DNA tells a much more subtle story. We don't just fight, we live together, and sometimes we love each other. In caves in Croatia, in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, in the Rhone Valley of France, scientists have found genetic evidence that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred. They were not two completely separate worlds. They mingled, leaving behind children of mixed blood, children who were neither quite them nor quite us. This changes the way we look at history, because it means we weren't the only ones from the beginning. Neanderthals weren't the failed species they were once labeled. They were a true branch of humanity, with intelligence, culture, emotions, the ability to love and sacrifice, just like us. Take a moment. Imagine the scene clearly. One winter night, in a large cave, a fire was burning, the light reflecting off the mottled rock walls. There sat the Neanderthal, his eyes deep and dark, his jaw square, his thick hand holding a worn stone axe. On the other side, the Homo sapiens, more graceful, his eyes bright, his voice murmuring unfamiliar words. At first, they looked at each other with caution, but then, through the winters, through the hunts, through the moments of sharing fire, sharing food, something else sprouted. A touch, a look longer than usual. A child is born, carrying the legacy of two worlds. Today, we are the descendants of those moments. In every cell, in every gene, there are traces of ancient loves, hugs on cold nights, kisses by the fire. They are not just them, they are part of us. But behind that intersection, there are also quiet tensions. Neanderthals were powerful, but lived in small, loosely knit groups. Homo sapiens were the opposite. They formed large networks, shared tools, shared ideas, even shared beliefs in intangible things like spirits, gods, and symbols, and that gave them an overwhelming advantage. As the ice melted and the predators dwindled, the two species were forced into direct competition for survival. In that race, Homo sapiens became more flexible, more creative, and better organized. Gradually, Neanderthals began to retreat. Some 40,000 years ago, the last traces of them disappeared from Europe. But it was not a complete disappearance, because in the blood of billions of people today, they still live. So, the big question is, did Neanderthals really disappear because they were exterminated? Or did they become so integrated into us that there was no longer any boundary to distinguish them? DNA doesn't give us the definitive answer, but it does tell us one thing for sure. Human history isn't just a story of us replacing them. It's also a story of us becoming a part of each other. And that was the fateful moment that forever changed the future of mankind. Stop, And look at yourself. Do you have thick hair? Or pale, sunburned skin? Do you sometimes have trouble sleeping, get stressed easily, or have hay fever? If the answer is yes, then it could very well be a gift or a curse of the Neanderthals. When scientists sequenced the entire Neanderthal genome, they realized something shocking. Most people on Earth today, especially Europeans and Asians, carry between mote% and bone% Neanderthal DNA. A small percentage, but enough to leave a deep mark on our bodies. Which means, whenever you look in the mirror, you're not just seeing you. You're also seeing the shadow of a distant Neanderthal ancestor who lived, loved, had children, leaving a part of himself behind for you. So, what do those DNA fragments do? Skin and hair. Some Neanderthal genes helped our ancestors adapt to the cold climate in Europe. They affect the pigmentation of the skin and hair, helping to retain heat and protect against the weak sunlight of the Ice Age. Perhaps, thanks to them, Europeans today have light skin and blonde, red, or brown hair. Immunity. Some Neanderthal genes enhanced immunity, helping Homo sapiens newly arrived from Africa fight against strange viruses and bacteria in Europe. It was a biological shield that without which we probably could not have survived in that harsh environment. Emotions and sleep. Surprisingly, Neanderthal DNA is also linked to our biological clock, how we sleep, wake up, and react to light. Many studies show that some people with Neanderthal genes are prone to insomnia or more sensitive to daylight. Psychology and mental health. Some shocking studies show that Neanderthal genes are related to the tendency to anxiety, depression, and even the ability to endure pain. They left not only their muscles and skin, but also their imprint on our minds. Imagine when you stand in front of the ocean, the cold wind whips against your face, and a feeling of both fierceness and melancholy rises in your heart. Maybe part of that feeling comes from your Neanderthal DNA. When you are angry, stressed, or feel scared in the dark, it may not just be you. It is also an echo from those frozen nights in the cave 40,000 years ago. Neanderthal still whispers in your blood. But not all are gifts. Some Neanderthal genes make modern humans more susceptible to diseases. For example, type 1 diabetes, lupus, and even respiratory complications from COVID-19. Scientists call it a double-edged evolutionary legacy. What helped our ancestors survive, now, in modern society, has become a burden. This begs the question, is our Neanderthal heritage a gift of survival or a shadow of extinction? But there is one undeniable truth. Every time you hear your heart beat, every time you breathe, every time you feel sadness, joy, or love, part of those emotions is Neanderthal coming back to life in you. They don't disappear. They're in our blood, in our minds, in our souls. And in a sense, we are them. These discoveries have shaken up the way we understand humanity. There is no longer a clear line between us and them. Human history is not simply a story of Homo sapiens replacing Neanderthals. Rather, it is a story of intermingling, a DNA mosaic, where every cell in our body is proof that humans are never alone. We are the product of many worlds, many species, many intertwined destinies. And if you want to know where did Neanderthals really come from, the answer is they didn't just come from the past. They are still here, in you. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on the frozen steppe of Europe 40,000 years ago. The sky is grey. The wind whistles through the bare branches. In the snow, Neanderthal footprints mingle with Homo sapiens footprints. Two species, coexisting. But only one species moves forward into the future. The question that has haunted humanity for more than a century is, why did Neanderthals disappear? Scientists have come up with countless theories, but each theory is like a piece of a puzzle. When put together, we see the tragic picture clearly. Date down to the Tenches, harsh climate. Neanderthals lived through many ice ages, but the last period was harsher than ever. The ice expanded, the forests disappeared, and food sources were depleted. Neanderthals were strong, but their bodies required a lot of energy. They were good hunters, but they depended on large animals. When those animals became extinct, Neanderthals fell into famine. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens were more diverse. They hunted small animals, knew how to fish, and gathered many kinds of plants. In the race for survival, flexibility became a deadly weapon. The Neanderthal population and genetics were never large. The entire species population probably never exceeded a few tens of thousands, scattered across Eurasia. On the contrary, Homo sapiens poured in from Africa, growing in number and strength. And when the two streams collided, the balance tilted. The small population, with little new genetic inheritance, made the Neanderthals increasingly vulnerable. One epidemic, one harsh winter, was enough to wipe out the entire community. Competition and conflict. Imagine this. In a cold valley, a herd of reindeer migrates. It's the only source of food. Both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens see it. Who will hunt first? Who will survive? There may have been bloody clashes. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthal bones bear marks of weapon injuries. They were not only fighting against nature, but also their new cousins, aggressive, numerous, and hungry for dominance. Marriage and dissolution. But not every encounter ends in blood. Sometimes it ends in love. When Homo sapiens and Neanderthals mingled, they left behind children, and those children, of both bloodlines, often merged into the larger sapiens community. Over time, Neanderthals didn't just die. They melted into us. They didn't disappear in an instant, but gradually faded, like a small flame blown out by a strong wind. But perhaps the deepest reason lies not in strength or numbers, but in imagination. Homo sapiens did more than hunt. They painted on cliffs, carved symbols, and made musical instruments. They told stories around fires, passed on their beliefs, aspirations, and fears. It was culture and language that turned a group of people into a large, cohesive, self-sacrificing community. Meanwhile, evidence suggests that Neanderthals were less creative. They could make tools, they could decorate, but they did not develop systems. And so, in the game of intelligence and symbols, they were left behind. So, was the death of the Neanderthals inevitable? Maybe, but maybe it was just a small turning point in history. Imagine if Neanderthals were still around today. They could live next to us, be our neighbors, our colleagues. The world would have two species, writing the story of civilization together. But the reality is different. They are gone. We are left, and fragments of their DNA in every cell. The death of Neanderthals is not a failure. It is a reminder that the Earth is not forgiving. Only the most adaptable, creative, and cohesive survive. And it is also a reminder for us, modern Homo sapiens. Because if one day the climate changes again, an epidemic breaks out again, or human society pushes itself to extinction, then our fate may be no different from theirs. Neanderthals no longer walk this earth, but they never disappeared. Because every time you breathe, every time you think, every time you feel pain and joy, a part of you is continuing their story. And perhaps that is true immortality. When we look in the mirror, we see ourselves, but somewhere, hidden deep in every hair, every vein, every cell, there is an echo from the past, a soft voice of Neanderthal. DNA, the thread connecting two worlds. Today, thanks to ancient DNA decoding technology, scientists have discovered most modern people outside of Africa carry between mote and bone percent Neanderthal genes. That means Neanderthals never completely disappeared. They live on in us, in our blue eyes, our fair skin that easily tans, or our immunity to disease. Some Neanderthal genes are also involved in immunity, helped our ancestors fight off new viruses and bacteria when they left Africa. Physiology affects sleep, ability to adapt to cold climate. Psychological, behavioral, can affect how we handle stress or our tendency to depression. Think about it. When you shiver in the cold or when you resist an illness, it may be thanks to an invisible Neanderthal legacy cultural heritage, unanswered questions, not only in DNA, but also in collective memory. Neanderthals left a trace, the exquisite stone tools they left behind, the caves marked with the ashes of hearth fires, the carefully buried bones, all suggest that Neanderthals knew how to love, how to grieve, how to remember the dead. If so, then they were not just silent hunters. They had souls, a fragile light, very close to modern humans. Perhaps we still do not fully understand them. Perhaps they once told stories by the fire, sang in deep caves. But time has erased their language, leaving only silence. And it is that silence that makes them legendary. Lessons for humanity today. The death of Neanderthal is not just a personal tragedy. It is a mirror. It reminds us that muscle strength does not guarantee survival. Quantity is not everything. The only thing that helps a species weather the storm is adaptability and cohesion. As the climate changes, as wars, epidemics and crises spread, we, Homo sapiens, cannot afford to be complacent, because, with just one mistake, one disaster, we could follow in the footsteps of Neanderthals. They didn't die, they became us. Instead of thinking Neanderthals disappeared, try thinking differently. They chose a different way of immortality. They are in our blood. They carry their stories in their genes, in the bones that lie beneath the soil. They become part of humanity, not in form, but in memory and DNA. And every time we ask ourselves the question, who am I? Where do I come from? Somewhere, deep within our bodies, the Neanderthal whispers, I am here. I am you. The open ending, the echoes of our ancestors. Science continues to excavate, continues to decode. Each piece of ancient DNA, each new fossil, tells a story that has never been known. Maybe one day we will understand more clearly, not only how they lived, but also what they dreamed about. But until then, Neanderthals will live on in our imaginations, at once wild and familiar, alien and alien. Imagine this: you're standing in a paleontology museum, facing a Neanderthal skull with deep-set eye sockets. You look into it, and it feels like they're looking back at you, not as another species, but as a mirror. Because in the end, Neanderthal's story is also our story. A story of life, of death, of struggle, of hope, and above all, of the will to survive. So when you step outside in the morning, breathe in the air, watch the sun rise. Remember, you don't just carry the DNA of Homo sapiens, you also carry the echoes of Neanderthal. And as long as we are here, they will never disappear.